Welcome to the New Year's edition of the Kahal Yereim Daf Yomi Shiur. And Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Mr. Michael Saidi for Hatzlacha with making Aliyah, and in honor of his late father Zohar ben Ruvain Zichron Avrocha. And Daf Yomi for the month is also sponsored by Moshe and Susie Feder, Lilu Nishmas, Mr. Feder's father, Aryeh ben Michal, whose yahrzeit was on the 15th Elul, and Lilu Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's mother, Roisa Bas Simcha HaKohen, whose yahrzeit was on the 18th Elul. May their neshamos have an aliyah. And Daf Yomi continues to be sponsored for the week by Rabbi Aaron and Evelyn Kislasi. This is a refuah shlema for and a chatima tova for their and a healthy new year for Rabbi Aaron's first cousin Sarah Bat Aziza. We are towards the middle of the page where the two dots are. Tu Rami Milsa Achrisi. If you recall, when we started the Masechta, we had an interesting exchange that Rava told Rav Papa, you missed a great shiur that Rava gave, and he contrasted a number of issues and gave some interesting terutzim, some interesting answers. So the next one of those is Tu Rami Milsa. There's another one of these contradictions. And it starts like this. Mi Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Chatas Sheshachtu L'Shem Ola Psula. Okay, so Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that if you have a chatos, a sin offering, Sheshachtu L'Shem Ola, if you shacht it for an Ola, korban Ola, then it's puzzle. Okay, that's because we said in our Mishnah that we recall that if you have in mind one korban and you change it to a different, you have one korban and you change it, the Kohen has in mind when he's shechting it for a different korban, that doesn't invalidate the offering, that only makes it not usable for that person. However, when it comes to the korban chatos, and when it comes to the korban Pesach during the Pesach time, that will actually invalidate the offering. And we gave a basic explanation. We'll get into more detailed explanation when we get to those pages of the Gemara, that those korbanos sort of have a much more a close relationship. You can't change those korbanos. You see, psukim, it's really based on psukim. The psukim are going to tell us that you can't do that. So this idea that if I have a korban chatos, I have a sin offering, and I change it to a korban ola, that's puzzle. Okay, shachta l'shem chulin kshera. So is he saying that, let's say I slaughter it for the sake of not sacrificial meat at all. I don't change it to another korban. So does that mean it's kosher? Right? So, right, what we had basically said is you change it from one korban to another, that ruins it. But if I go from korban to nothing, I just figure I'm shechting it for lunch, is that okay? Alma, so that would mean to say, demino machriv ba. This is the principle that the closer to the item the bad intention is, the worse it is. Right? If I decide, hey, this shechting is, I'm just, making it, I'm shechting it for lunch, that doesn't mean anything to it because this is a korban. But if I change it from one korban to another, that's worse. Because remember that we had said in the daf that we had before Rosh Hashanah, we had talked about stam. If I have no intention is better than bad intention, right? We said no intention is better than bad. So this is the same idea. If I've got intention, this is this concept that the closer to the item itself the intention is, the worse it is. Delav mina lo marchiba, but if it's not the same type of item, then it doesn't destroy it. Ura minhi, but we have a contradiction to that statement. Kol get shenichtav shelo l'shem isha pasul. If I have a divorce contract, right, and the divorce contract is not written for the sake of this woman, so then that divorce contract is nullified. That's no good. Now, even if I decide to write it for a non-Jewish woman, sometimes it says he writes a get for a non-Jewish woman. Now, having a get for a non-Jewish, there's no such thing as a get for a non-Jewish woman. There's no such thing as marriage to a non-Jewish woman. So therefore, a get for a non-Jewish woman is nothing. So now, the question is, if this get is a meaningless intention, why should the get be ruined? If you just told me that the less connected that the intention is, the better it is. So having a get for a non-Jewish woman should not invalidate the get. So the answer is, Vishani get, a get is different. Why? Because Dal Avodas Kocham, take that, the element of the non-Jewish lady out of it. Let's say he just wrote the get stam, right? Dal Ovedas Kochavamine, take the non-Jewish lady out of it. Havali stama, at best, you've got a get that has no intention, right? Remove the, you got a get that has nobody on it. Ustama puzzle. And we know that a get that has nothing on it is nullified. That's no good. That's what we learned before. Kodshim, but when it comes to a korban, dal chulin minayhu, if you take the negative intention out of it, the negative intention being that it should be for lunch, regular meat, so then havalei stama, then what have you got? You've got shechting an animal with no intent. Ustama kshirim, we said that when it comes to a korban, shechting with no intent is kosher. So therefore, that's why it's different. Okay, simple answer. V'rama mil achrisi, another contradiction, another one. Mi amar Rav Yehuda, amar Rav, when Rav Yehuda said Rav, chantas sheshachtet l'shem ola psula, let's say you've got a korban chatos, and they shacht it for the sake of a korban ola, changing it. It's puzzle. Shachtet l'shem chulin keshera. Okay, now, we just said that if you shacht it for the sake of nothing, that becomes a kosher sacrifice. It doesn't invalidate the offering, and the offering is still valid. So alma dimina machriba. That means that we're saying that the closer to the item, right? There's a principle to that. I don't remember what it was called. There's something called this, like if you have people get very disturbed when they see people's faces, but they're slightly off, right? Like if somebody does a drawing. So if something is close to it, right? So it ruins it. So de lo mina lo machrivba, but if it's completely not from the same type, it's not a korban, that's just stam, it's not going to invalidate the offering. Vehatanya, but we have a brisa. Toho velo toho. Here we got our drawing. Okay. My pen. Here we go. All right. We're going to have a drawing also. I'm going to be like Art Scroll. Patent pending, all copyrights reserved. Okay?
Also no R together.
Okay. They had in those days ovens. They essentially looked like this. You put the coals in the bottom here, right? And heat it up. Okay? So what you would do is, they're earthenware. So tuma, the rule by earthenware is that if it comes in contact with something that's a sheretz, let's take our sheretz case, our creepy crawly dead animal creature, it's going to transmit tuma, cannot transmit tuma by touching the outside of it, but if it comes into the airspace on the inside, everything on the inside becomes tummy. Okay? Now, this utensil, and we're going to do the X-ray edition, the X-ray version, has inside of it another utensil, and the top of that utensil comes out of the top, okay? Now, you've got your dead mouse here, right? This is Mickey Mouse here. He's dead, right? Okay. Okay, that's our Mickey Mouse, okay? And he's a pretty good, right?
Yeah.
No, Art School doesn't have that one. Okay, and I've got my.
I like this one even better.
I've got my food inside here, inside this utensil. Okay, so this is called tocho, inside the inside, right? Secondary utensil. Okay, now he says afilu klishetef, even if this utensil on the inside isn't even earthenware. Even if it's metal, and normally when it comes to metal, if tuma touches the outside of the metal utensil, then it makes that metal utensil tameh. In this circumstance, right, matzil, it protects the food that's inside that inner utensil from receiving tuma from the dead sheretz inside the outer utensil. Now, the shani, and we are learning, also chulin etzel kodshim kemechitza etzel tanur. Now, we are learning that I can also have this same oven, right? I need a new marker. I'm gonna have. Okay. I have my oven. The other way I could do this is I could
red.
Let's use red. Okay, good. I can partition this with a wall down the middle of it. Okay. If I partition this with a wall down the middle of it, and I put my dead sheretz over here. So then anything that's on this side is still tameh. The wall doesn't stop the tuma. A utensil does stop the tuma. Okay? So now we're going to explain that this wall is chulin etzel, is like chulin etzel kodshim kemechitza. This wall, this chulin, is essentially so different than kodshim that it's not related to kodshim. And so this wall is also so different than the utensil, because a wall is not a utensil. So then it's also...
A wall's like a barrier, isn't it?
It's a barrier, but it's not a utensil. We can't use the word barrier because the utensil's a barrier. This wall is just simply a wall, right? So it's like a mechitza by a tanur, by this oven. Ma mechitza etzel tanur lo mahanya laklal. This wall doesn't block the tuma. Doesn't block the tuma at all. Af chulin etzel kodshim lo mahanya leklal. So too, it's because why? Because it's not a utensil. It doesn't have any connection. It's not remotely connected to this. You basically just put something else into this oven. It didn't stop the tuma. So too, the chulin, the non-sacrificial intent, doesn't stop. It's so unrelated to sacrificial intent that it doesn't stop the sacrificial intent. Ditnan, as we learned in a Mishnah. Tanur shechatzu b'nesarim o b'yerios. Let's say you've got an oven, and you make some kind of a boundary between one side of the oven and the other with some kind of branches or with curtains, right, in the middle of it. Now, I don't think it's on fire at that point, right? But let's say you have it on one side and the tuma's on the other side. The nimtza sheretz b'makom echad, and the sheretz is on one part of it, right? The sheretz is on this side, so hakol tameh. Then the entire thing, everything on the inside is now tameh, because the wall doesn't block it. Koveres shehi pechusa upekuka bekash umishulashes le'avir. Now, this, I think the article probably has a picture of this, right? And this will have a description of it. There's a utensil, right? There you go. You've got a utensil hanging, right? You've got a utensil, and it's hanging in the airspace of this oven, and it has a hole in it, which we're going to learn in other places. Once you put a hole in a utensil, it's not a utensil anymore. A utensil has to be able to hold items in it. This utensil's got a big hole in it. Now, even if you plugged up the hole with straw, that's not considered a permanent fix. So therefore, that's not going to be a utensil. And it's dangling into the airspace of your hatanur. Sheretz besocha hatanur tameh. So then the sheretz, which is in the oven, is going to invalidate everything that's inside of that utensil as well, because that utensil is not going to block anything. Okay. Now, sheretz betanur ochlin shebetocha tamein. Right? If you've in that circumstance, you've got a sheretz in the tanur, all the food that's inside of that is going to be tamei. Now, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. Rabbi Eliezer says mitayer. He says that it's still going to block it. Now, why does Rabbi Eliezer hold that way? Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says kal v'chomer. Look, a wall is a very significant barrier. That's what the word Yehuda used. It's a good word for Rabbi Eliezer, right? It's a barrier. Because im hitzel b'meis hachamor lo tatzil b'kli cheres hakal. Imagine you've got a room, and in this room you've got a mace, a body. You've got a corpse. Everything in the room becomes tamei because it's under the same roof, and that's the rule by a mace. Everything in the room becomes tamei when you've got a mace inside of the room. Now, how do you block the tuma of a mace from spreading? You have a full floor-to-ceiling barrier. If you have a wall that blocks completely off, everything that's in the room with the mace is tamei. Everything that's in the next room is not tamei, which indicates to you that which is the more severe type of impurity, a sheretz or a mace. A mace is more severe. A mace is more severe because it makes somebody tamei for 7 days. You need to have the paraduma. It's a much more severe type of a tuma. Whereas a sheretz, you've got to go to the mikvah. It's a lesser severe. So therefore, what you see is, says Rabbi Eliezer, a wall is a barricade that blocks very severe types of tuma, like mace, right? So now, if I'm in this circumstance and I build a wall, a barrier between the two, a kal v'chomer should for sure protect against the sheretz from transferring from one side of the utensil to the other. Amru lo, says the chachamim back to him, yeah, but lo im hitzil b'meis hachamor shekein chaluka ohalin. He says, yeah, but that's because how would you divide up a room? You divide up a room by building walls. And so therefore, when you're dealing with rooms and walls, build a wall, and that blocks your tuma from transferring. Tatzil bekli cheres hakal she'ein chalukin be'ohalin. That's not how you divide a utensil in half. right? That's, I guess, before Tupperware, right? They don't have you don't build walls inside of your utensils to divide your utensil. What happens if you have a utensil with a wall inside of it? You still have one utensil. It's got something in the middle of it. Right. That doesn't divide. So therefore, this is again similar to what we've been discussing. It's not of the same type, and therefore, since not of the same type, it doesn't register. Right? That's the issue for us. If it's similar types will block and register. Something that's of not the same type won't be relevant. So therefore, hatinach l'Rabbanan. So therefore, okay, we've got no issue in contradiction terms with the rabbi's view, right? The Rabbanan are saying that if I've got a wall and I've got a utensil, walls and utensils don't mix. So therefore, walls don't block tuma from transferring inside of a utensil. Hence, also, when I've got a korban and my intent is about chulin, about non-korban intent, that's not going to interfere with my korban because it's not even related. It's worse if it's intent with a korban. Just like the Chachamim will say it's worse, or better, I guess in that case, it's relevant, the utensil, another utensil, even if it's a metal utensil, is relevant as a blockage from tuma transferring from utensil to utensil. But Rabbi Eliezer, but we are bothered by Rabbi Eliezer's point of view. Rabbi Eliezer has this kal v'chomer, and Rabbi Eliezer is learning that a wall should create a blockage. So the answer is Rabbi Eliezer kal v'chomer kamar, right? Rabbi Eliezer's got this kal v'chomer. So therefore, it really isn't a problem. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer generally holds that something that isn't relevant something that isn't the same is not relevant. It's just that when it comes to impurity, he says, okay, you got to worry about walls. Why? Because I've got a kal v'chomer to tell me that even though, generally speaking, the principle is that if it has nothing to do with, something that has nothing to do with utensils, can't block utensils from transferring. But since I know that by a dead body, walls are significant, I have no choice but to say that it's an exception to the rule. My kal v'chomer tells me it's an exception to the rule. So therefore, it doesn't bother me if Rabbi Eliezer is saying it's an exception to the rule. Yeah, but ihachi, if that's true, that Rabbi Eliezer has a kal v'chomer, hasam nami lima kal v'chomer, right? Then Rabbi Eliezer should also be able to learn a kal v'chomer in the situation of sacrifices as well, because he should say kodshim mechalalin, kodshim chulin lo kol shekain. He should say, look, if if I have intention for another sacrifice, that's going to invalidate it. Then if I have even more distant, worse intent, that it should be not even a sacrifice, that for sure should invalidate it. So, I mean, that seems to be the logic, the line of reasoning that he's going with, right? So, so now, Ella, rather, Tama de Rav, Kirebi Elazar. Rather, the rationale that Rav gives, right, who says that achatos that gets changed for chulin, right, why is it permissible, is like Rabbi Elazar's point of view. Rabbi Elazar is not the same as Rabbi Eliezer. It's Rabbi Elazar the Amora, right? To Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar says, my taima de Rav, why is it that Rav holds that even though there's a kal v'chomer, even though there should be a reason why, basically what Rabbi Eliezer is saying is the more distant your intention is, the worse it is, right? That should be significant, is because the pasuk says, "V'lo yichalu es kodshe b'nei Yisrael es asher yarumu laHashem," right? That you should not have this other bad intent, and you should not profane the holy objects of the Jewish people, right? That you have separated for Hashem. Now, that pasuk is actually talking about truma, but we're going to apply it also to kodshim. That's what's going on here. So I can't invalidate it. Now, kodshim, which we're going to explain, kodshim mechalalin kodshim, that means that intent, this pasuk seems to say that the intent to transfer it from one type of kodesh to another type is going to invalidate vein chulin mechalin kodshim, right? From the pasuk that says velo yichalalu means you shall not profane. Doesn't mean you shall not profane. It means it cannot be profaned by chulin intent. That's how we're reading this pasuk. If you have chulin intent, if you have intent that this korban becomes chulin, it's irrelevant. Meaningless. Therefore, the only way to invalidate a sacrifice is to have is to have an intent for a different sacrifice. Okay? Okay, so now that means that despite the fact that Rabbi Eliezer has a kal v'chomer, this pasuk outweighs a kal v'chomer. If you have a listing, and there's in other mesechtos, we have this conversation about which type of drashos are stronger than other types. Kal v'chomer is like the weakest. Right? Kal v'chomer is actually pretty weak drasha. If you've got a kal v'chomer and I can bring you a hekesh, I can bring you a gezerah shava, I can bring you a pasuk itself and a drash of a pasuk, those are always outweigh our kal v'chomer. Right? Our kal v'chomer is outweighed by this pasuk. Okay, that's why. So now, alma osakra afkemi kal v'chomer. So that means that the pasuk is essentially overruling the kal v'chomer when it comes to kodshim. But Rabbi Eliezer must not hold that the pasuk is outweighing the kal v'chomer when it comes to the utensils, because he holds that the wall, the barrier, actually does block the tumah. But why not? Hachinami leisi tocho lafkimi kal v'chomer. Why shouldn't he look at the pasuk, which says that if you've got impurity, if you've got your tumah inside the utensil, it transfers tumah, which means that if inside another utensil, inside the utensil, it does not transfer tumah. The pasuk seems also to overrule his other kal v'chomer. So his psukim always overrule his kal v'chomer.
His kal v'chomer was only for the mechitza in the middle of the...
Yes.
Right?
Well, yes.
What does that pasuk have to do with...
So this pasuk tocho seems to say that tocho v'lav toch tocho. The pasuk is telling us only if the what's the whole pasuk? The whole pasuk. The pasuk says, right? V'chol kli cheres asher yipol mehem el tocho. Any earthenware utensil that it falls into it, kol asher besocho yitma. Right? It says anything that is in it becomes tameh, and so therefore, if I see tocho. Well, we're going to see how they're going to say it doesn't, but essentially that they're interpreting this pasuk to mean that he says tocho v'yilamid shekol ha'ochim shebetocha tamar nitmeim. Everything inside becomes tameh, va'afilu im heim me'ever ha'mechitza, even if the mechitza is there, right? Because the pasuk says everything, and if the pasuk says everything inside becomes tameh, so then it seems like it's an extra word tocho there, right? It says everything that's inside becomes tameh, despite the fact that you have a kal v'chomer that might have thought that the wall should stop it. Tocho tells me everything inside is tameh. So so we have the same idea, right? He's got his kal v'chomer, but he's got a pasuk that overrides his kal v'chomer. Why is it that he still thinks his kal v'chomer is strong when it comes to the utensils, but his kal v'chomer is overridden by the pasuk when it comes to kodshim? So the answer is, Hai tocho mi boile la'ochen shegivlon betit v'hichnoson la'avir tanur. He says he uses that word tocho for a different purpose. That's why. So that pasuk tells me, let's say I've got food and I wrap it in clay. Okay, so it's completely enclosed. It's not in a utensil. It's just wrapped in clay. And then I put that wrapped in clay into a utensil. So then I might have thought, I might have thought, there's no way I could touch the food and make it tameh because it's completely enclosed. So therefore, the aviro nami lo mitamu. Therefore, if it goes into the airspace of a utensil, it also can't become tameh. You can't get to the food. Therefore, it's insulated, it's protected. Kamash Malon, the pasuk says, no, everything in the utensil is going to become tameh. Everything in the utensil becomes tameh. Now that means that he's learning that is the reason why it says everything in the utensil becomes tameh, not everything, even if there's a wall, becomes tameh. So therefore, he holds that if the wall can be learned from a kal v'chomer, and I can say the wall. Now, v'rabbanon, hanach lo tzrichi kro. The rabbanon say I don't need a pasuk for that. That seems much more clear to the rabbanon that simply insulating is not going to be sufficient to block. Therefore, they say that the word tocho comes and overrules the kal v'chomer, and that's why they have a different point of view than Rabbi Eliezer. But everyone agrees that the pasuk overrules the kal v'chomer when it comes to chulin intent. That's why we don't have, and there's no invalidation if I have intent for non-korban intent for my korban chatos rather than for a different korban.
So we're still saying, from the beginning of this sugya, the lav mina, if it's distant, it's not going to be
correct,
right?
Yes.
But then it's confusing because
yes.
To answer Rabbi Eliezer, we said, the Rabbanan actually say
if it's closed, right?
It's because of this drasha we make from the pasuk that chulin is different.
Yes. And not only that, but wait till we get to the next one, and we're going to see that we sort of backtrack this a little bit and see if sort of say it the other way. The way I understand it is there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. If something is really bad intent, right, it seems like that might invalidate. If it's really close, it invalidates. There's like a sweet spot in the middle that it's close but not quite too close, and that's what we're going to be looking for.
Okay.
I think because that's because we're going to flip it in a minute, make it worse. Okay. Rav Yosef Bar Ami Rami Shinui Kodesh Ashinui Balim. Okay, so now we've been talking up until this point about, so we sort of mentioned that you can change the intent not just from one sacrifice to another sacrifice, but you could change the intent from one person to another person. Okay, so let's say, for example, somebody has, Joe is bringing his korban for his sin, and this Kohen says that this korban that I'm slaughtering should not be for Joe, it should be for, Jeff. Okay, not Jeff. I don't want to say pick Jeff, right? And do a korban, right? For Reuven. Okay, it's better for Reuven. Okay, so now. Okay, so now, right? It's good to point out at the outset because this confused me until I finally got it on like the third time the Gemara mentioned it, so I may as well mention it now. There is a difference between having the wrong intent, having intent for the wrong sacrifice, and having the intent for the wrong person. And that is that when you're having the intent for the wrong person, I'm not saying, when I'm having the intent for the wrong sacrifice, I'm changing this sacrifice, which is a korban shlomim, into a korban ola. That's what that means. I might then say the parallel is, I change this from Reuven's sacrifice into Shimon's sacrifice. That is not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're saying, this is Reuven's sacrifice, but it should provide for an atonement for Shimon. That Reuven's sacrifice is still Reuven's sacrifice, but it should atone Shimon. It's a nuance, but we're going to see it's going to make a difference in the Gemara later on, that if a person sacrifices Reuven's korban for Shimon, that may not invalidate it, right? It's only if I change Reuven's and so now what difference does that make? Sacrificing Reuven's sacrifice for the sake of an atonement for Shimon, we mentioned that there are 4 stages to the sacrifice, right? Slaughtering it, capturing the blood, walking the blood to the Mizbeach, and sprinkling the blood. The person gets atonement when the blood is sprinkled on the Mizbeach. That's when the atonement actually happens, which means that in order to change the owner of the sacrifice, what the Kohen really has to have in mind, or the person who's doing the slaughtering, is he has to have in mind that this offering will be sprinkled for the sake of an atonement of Shimon. At this point, the sacrifice is still Reuven's korban. But I'm going to sprinkle this later on for the sake of an atonement for Shimon. Okay. Just that doesn't make that big a difference here, but it will several places in the Gemara along the next few pages. So now, Rav Yosef Bar Ami, Rami Shinui Kodesh Ashinui Balim. Rav Yosef contrasts how it works when one changes the intent from one sacrifice to a different one, and when one changes the intent from atonement to another person's atonement. Umeshani, he teaches like this. Mi Amar Rav, chatas shechshachta l'shem chatas kshera. Let's say a person slaughters a sin offering for the sake of another sin offering. So that is kosher. That's still going to be kosher. For example, right? This person did 2 averos. Right? Reuven has a sacrifice. He brought a korban chatos. He's bringing two korban chatos. He's got one because he ate forbidden fats. He ate chalev, and one because he ate blood. Okay? The Kohen makes a mistake, and he thinks this is the one for the blood, but it's the one for the chalev. Doesn't matter. Korban's kosher. Because same person, right? Same sacrifice, different avera, it's okay.
Are you supposed to have the avera in mind, the specific avera?
Yes. So it could be, does it atone for the other one? That's the question. Whether that atones for that whether it atones for that avera or not, might still be questionable. We're going to see it later on Daf Zayin. So if you have that question, we'll see it later on. Okay, I don't remember the answer. The answer is I don't remember. Not sure whether it fixes that core, but whether it fixes that avera or not. Okay, so now, L'shem ola psula. But if he changes the korban chatos to a korban ola, that we know the whole korban is no good. Okay? Alma delav mina machriv ba. That means that if it's not the same type, it's worse. So now you see, it's if we flipped the script, right? Before we were saying if it's so distant, it doesn't, right? But there's a sweet spot here because it's still, if I said l'shem chulin, if I changed it to chulin, that would be too far. It wouldn't ruin it. If I say it for the same sacrifice, that also doesn't ruin it. It's chatos for a chatos, right?
But Ola is
a little different, but too close to being the same, right? So that's why I say it's like there's a sweet spot in here, okay? So now that means that delav mino machriv ba, if it's not the same sacrifice, it ruins it. De mino lo machriv ba, that means if it was the same type, it won't ruin it. V'hamar Rav, but didn't Rav say, chata sheshachta ami shemechuyev chatos psula. Let's say I've got somebody, there's a person, two people, one person, Reuven and Shimon. Shimon has a korban chatos that he has to bring also. Reuven has a korban chatos that he has to bring. If this Kohen shechts Reuven's korban with the intent that it should create an atonement for Shimon, who has to bring a korban chatos, so then it's puzzle, that it ruins it. But let's say Shimon didn't have to bring a korban chatos. Shimon never did any averos. He only didn't do a mitzvah's aseh. And therefore, he has to bring a korban ola. He is sitting here waiting to bring his korban ola. That is not going to invalidate. That's not considered a shinoi balim. That isn't going to be a change of owner, because the only way to ruin a sacrifice by change of owner is that I have to change it from Reuven, who needs to bring a sin offering, to Shimon, who needs to bring a sin offering. As we'll see it later on. There's a pasuk that tells us this, right? It's like these are givens at this point, but we'll see the pasuk for it later on. But if I change it from Reuven, who needs to bring a sacrifice, to Shimon, who doesn't need a sacrifice, that doesn't ruin it. Alma de barmino machriv, that means that he's closer, since he has to bring a sacrifice. Shimon has to bring a sacrifice also. That's a sin offering. He ruins it. Delav mina lo machriv, but if he's not a person who has to bring a korban, he doesn't have to bring a sacrifice. He doesn't ruin it. So, which is it? The closer you are, the more it ruins it. This seems to imply that the closer, since he is somebody who has to bring a korban, he does ruin it. And then we said by the korban chatos that if it was the same type of offering, it doesn't ruin it. So which is it? So hasam, there, again, it's because of pasuk. The pasuk says, v'shachat osol lechatos. Right? The pasuk says that you slaughter it as a sin offering. Amar Rachman. That's what the Torah says. Therefore, the Torah is giving us the rule that says a sin offering for a sin offering is not a change. The pasuk just says it has to be for a sin offering. You change it from a sin offering for one sin to a sin offering for another sin. That isn't a significant change because you ultimately did bring it as a sin offering. But here, when you're changing people, it says v'chaper alav. You're atoning for him. Ksiv alav velo al chavero. It means that it has to be an atonement for Reuven, not an atonement for Shimon. Now, when you're comparing, when the pasuk has two people in the same pasuk together, we have a hekesh sort of a situation, which means the two things are compared to each other. So, chavero dumya didei, his friend, in order for him to be an invalidating person, has to be similar to him. Shemechuyev kapara kamosa, he has to be somebody in order to invalidate for that intention to change from Reuven to Shimon. Shimon has to be somebody who also has a korban chatos to bring. If Shimon is an irrelevant person, right? I just decide I'm bringing my korban. The guy shechts it for the sake of somebody who has no korban in the game. So then his intention doesn't ruin it. So again, we're trying to find out. I guess the summary of this is. Is it the closer it is, the worse it is? The further it is, the worse it is? The answer is, it all depends on the pasuk, right? The pasuk seems to say, the rules shift. There's a sweet spot in the middle here. Sometimes it's too close, it doesn't ruin it. Sometimes it's too far, it doesn't ruin it. There's a middle zone that it's close enough, but not close enough, and that's where it gets ruined. Okay, so I guess hopefully that answers how we keep doing this with these psukim. Rav Chaviva Rami Shinoi Balim Atoch Tocho. Now Rav Chaviva, he's going to draw a contradiction, right, to our favorite cases. Okay? Change of owners, these are two side cases, right? Changing the owner, right? And this utensil case. Right? One utensil inside the other utensil. Our two favorites. Umeshani, he says like this. Umi Amar Rav Chata Sheshachta Al Misha Mechuyev Chatas Psula. That Rav is saying that if you are slaughtering this sacrifice for somebody else who also owns a sacrifice, so then who doesn't require a sacrifice of a korban chatos, but rather an olah, that's kshera, right? He's not similar enough. That's the idea, right? Since this person, Shimon, doesn't have to bring a korban chatos, intent for him doesn't ruin our korban chatos. Alma demina machrivba. That means that you need somebody who is more similar. Reuven and Shimon have to be similar in order for Shimon, intent for Shimon to ruin it.
Sorry, you're reading that parentheses?
I am.
How do you read that?
So I really like this. Rav says, Chatos sheshachta amish mechuyev chatos psula. If you shecht a korban chatos for the sake of another person who has to bring a korban chatos, that ruins it. Amish mechuyev ola kshera. But if he only has to bring a korban ola, he's kosher. Okay? What, does the article not bring that? They don't read it?
I wasn't reading I wasn't able to read.
Okay, good. Yeah, so fine. Alma demina machriv ba. That means that the closer you are, right, since he's a person who has to bring a korban chatos, Shimon's the person who has to bring a korban chatos, he's going to ruin the sacrifice. He's going to ruin my chatos. He's going to ruin Reuven's chatos because he also has to bring a chatos. Lav mina, but if he's not similar, if Shimon is not similar to Reuven, in that Shimon doesn't have to bring a korban chatos, lo machriv ba. He's not going to ruin Reuven's chatos because he only has to bring an olah. Vehatanya. But we learned in the brisa that we brought before, tocho velo toch tocho, right? That if I've got a utensil and I put another utensil inside of it, it's going to block the tuma. Afilu klishetef matzil. Even if that other utensil is a metal utensil. Now wait a second. Metal utensils are not similar to earthenware utensils. So why should a metal utensil block the tuma from traveling right into it? It's not the same, right? Earthenware utensils block earthenware utensils. That makes sense. A metal utensil shouldn't block an earthenware utensil's transference of tuma. So therefore, metal utensil shouldn't stop it, right? The word shetef means that you can rinse, right? The word shetef means to rinse.
To wash.
It means wash, correct, and you can wash it. So therefore, that we're using, when I say metal utensil, it's a utensil that you can put into a mikvah and make it tahar, whereas an earthenware utensil you can't bring to a mikvah. So therefore, we call it a metal utensil. Umeshani, so we are learning, so the answer is, Aravah tocho ksivi. There's 4 times that the word tocho is written there in that section. And therefore, since there's 4 of them, right, we're going to learn 4 different rules. Arba tocho ksiv, there's 4 times it's written. Tocho. It's actually written twice. The word tocho is written twice. But toch means inside. Tocho means in it. Each time tocho is written, it counts as 2. So therefore, since I've got tocho written twice, it's 4 drushos I can learn from it. Here's my list. Chad, the first time is legufe. That's the first of all. In order to tell me that everything inside, that's the rule itself. Everything inside of an earthenware utensil becomes tameh. That's rule number 1. V'chad ligzera shava. Second of all is to tell me the Gzera Shava, which tells me that the tuma of the utensil and the tuma of the food have the same rules. Just as everything in the airspace, if it comes into the airspace, it invalidates everything inside the utensil, so too, food that's inside the airspace also becomes tameh, despite the fact that it doesn't touch the tuma, okay?
This is Gzer Shava that we haven't learned here.
That we have not learned here, yes, correct. We don't, this is like, this tocho thing is sort of a side business here, so we're not bringing all the details of it, right? Number 3, v'chad, tocho shel zeh v'lo tocho shel acher. It only invalidates that which is inside this utensil and not what's inside a second utensil that's inside of it, right? And that hence the idea that's why we're bringing it to say that despite what you're suggesting that a metal utensil shouldn't be the same as an earthenware utensil, this drush number 3 tells us that it is significant, that the metal utensil is significant enough to block the tuma. It's Gzeras HaKasav. The Torah tells us that despite the fact that you might have thought it's not the same, it's the same enough. The Idach and the other one is to tell us tocho velo tocho, that it's not that. Sorry, that the tocho is the third one is tocho shel zeh velo tocho shel acher means only an earthenware utensil transmits tuma on the inside of it, not metal utensils. Metal utensils transfer through touch. And the fourth one is that if I've got a utensil inside of the other utensil, it does not transfer through from one utensil to the other utensil. Okay. Hence, right? That's the rule is different essentially by. And this is what we're trying to figure out. Why is it that if I have Ruvain who needs a korban chatos and Shimon who needs a korban ola, those are considered to be two different, and it doesn't invalidate, whereas a earthenware utensil can be blocked by a metal utensil? And the answer is because the pasuk says so. Yeah, that's the answer to all of them essentially is good point, but the pasuk says so, right? The pasuk says so. That's the answer. Okay. Next, Daled Amud Aleph. Minolan deba'inan zvicha lishma. Okay, so now we're going to get into the next section, and then we'll get a little bit down and we'll start. But at least to get started on this next section, that now that we've discussed some of these the basic principles here, what's the source? Where does the Torah tell us that you need to have your korban for the sake of that korban? So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking for psukim that tell us that this is the rule. And we're going to use a number of principles, right, that we're going to, as we get to come across each one, we're going to use some that we've seen before, like klal prat to klal. We're going to use some im eno inyans here. If it's not for this purpose, it's for something else. We'll use a few of these different principles in order to try to come to the conclusion that there's a pasuk that indicates that you need to have the proper korban in mind by each of these, okay? But there are going to be some new rules. And again, that we had mentioned this when we talked about last time, that when it comes to kodshim, the rule is that if the Torah tells us something once, then that means lechatchila, it's a mitzvah to do that. But if the Torah tells it twice, then it means it's ma'akev, it's critical that it's there. So we're looking, when it comes to this rule, we're really looking for it only to be written once, because remember, the halacha is, lechatchila, ideally, your korban needs to be brought with the right intent. But if it's not brought with the right intent, you still bring the sacrifice. B'diavad, still bring it, and you don't, but it doesn't count for its owner, but it's still, you don't throw the korban out. Okay, so minolan deba'inan zvicha lishma. So let's start off. First of the services is slaughtering. How do I know that the slaughtering of the animal has to be done with the proper intent for that korban? The Amar Krok, as the pasuk says, "Vim zevach shlomim korbano." If his sacrifice is the zevach shlomim, the slaughtering of the korban shlomim, shetehei zvicha l'shem shlomim. We're going to interpret that pasuk to say slaughtering must be for the sake of a korban shlomim. If you have a korban shlomim, the slaughtering must be as a shlomim, as it says, "Vim zevach shlomim korbano." If you sacrifice it for a shlomim, that's a sacrifice, then it's valid. Now, maybe that's not what the pasuk is saying. Maybe the name of the sacrifice is Zevach Shlomim, the sacrifice of Shlomim. That's the name of it, right? Zevach Shlomim is just like was a descriptive phrase, right? It's not a Zevach the verb. It's Zevach the adjective, the Korban Shlomim. Medichsev. So the answer is because the pasuk says Hamakriv es dam hashlomim, somebody who brings the blood of the shlomim. That's later on. So Hazorik es dam shlamim. Also later on it says you shall sprinkle the blood of the shlamim. V'loksiv zevach. In all those circumstances, it doesn't name the korban. It doesn't name the sacrifice. The zevach shlamim. So therefore, v'achiksiv zevach. Here it calls it a zevach. Means that the name of the sacrifice is shlamim, because you see it all the rest of the time. You read it in that section. The word shlamim is written by itself. That's the name of the korban. What is the word zevach? Zevach is a verb. Shmamina shitehei zvicha l'shem shlamim. It means the slaughtering must be for the sake of a korban shlamim. Great. That's number one. Simple enough. Ashkechon zvicha. So now I know that the slaughtering has to be done for a sacrifice. Shar avodos minolan. What about the rest of the items? What about bringing the blood close? What about the sprinkling the blood? What about catching the blood? Well, okay, once I learn one of the services, why don't I learn that it should be the same by all the others? maybe we have what's called a binyan av. A binyan av is where I see the rule in the Torah in one place, so it should apply, the same rule should apply in all similar circumstances. I don't need the Torah to write it every single time, should be the same. Since the Torah says, Mal is vicha shekain nifsel, so, sorry, that's the answer, right? I should say that if one of the services of sacrifices requires it to be for the intent of that proper sacrifice, all of the services do. Yeah, but there's a difference. Mal is vicha shekain nifsel shelo l'shem ochlin b'Pesach. Slaughtering is stricter than any of the other ones in that if I have a Korban Pesach and I slaughter the Korban Pesach with the wrong people in mind, that invalidates the offering. There's no other part of the korban that is like that. If I catch the blood for the wrong people, if I sprinkle the blood for the wrong people, that doesn't ruin the sacrifice. It only becomes ruined if I slaughter it. So therefore, if I slaughter it for the wrong people, since that's the case, now that's not the case by all korbanos, but it is the case by a korban pesach, which means that such a rule exists, and therefore there is a circumstance in which I find that slaughtering is more severe than any of the other services, which means I can't predict when slaughtering will be more severe. That's the point. Since I can't predict when it'll be more severe, it might be more severe here. So therefore I can't make a ruling from here to other places. So therefore it's got to be a pasuk. Ella Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Hamakrif es dam shlamim, right? You have to bring the blood of the shlamim close. Shetei Kabbalah l'shem shlamim. That the word hamakriv actually doesn't mean bringing it close, it means catching the blood. And that is, Tosfos talks about why it uses the language of hamakriv, that catching the blood is used in that, uses the phrase to bring it close. But this pasuk means that it is brought close for the sake, that the blood is caught for the sake of that sacrifice. L'shem shlamim. Okay, so okay, well, if I've got to catch the blood for the sake of the korban, so why can't I learn from that onto the slaughtering? I don't need a separate pasuk for slaughtering. If you tell me that this is the rule by catching the blood, then maybe that's the rule by slaughtering as well. The answer is mishum dekal mefrach. I could ask the question. Malek kabalish came psula bezar. He says, but because there's another element where slaughtering is more lenient than the other ones. And that is, slaughtering a sacrifice doesn't need a Kohen. A regular person can come and slaughter his own sacrifice, right? That's the first. All of the other services of the korban have to be done by a Kohen. Slaughtering does not need to be done by a Kohen. Therefore, it could be that catching the blood needs to be done for the sake of the sacrifice because it's part of the services that a Kohen needs to bring. Whereas slaughtering doesn't need to be brought for the sake of a korban, for the right korban, because it doesn't need a Kohen. So therefore, right, it's also, by the way, the Isha, right? It's also not able to be done by a woman. So there's a discussion why woman is brought separately than a Zar. Isn't a woman a non-Kohen? She's included. And so it becomes lots of conversation. A woman might not be a Zar. What if you have a woman who is a Bas Kohen and she does avoda in the Beis HaMikdash? It's not valid because a woman can't do it. But is she a Zar? What's the difference? Does she get the death penalty as a Zar? Conversation Rishonim, just interesting food for thought, right?
Wow.
But the fact that it says Bizar Be'isha, right? And Isha is not a Zar in this category. So now, Ashkechon Shchita ve'Kabbalah. So now we'll do one more, right? We've got Shchita, we've got Kabbalah, we've got 2 of the 4 services that we've brought Psukim to tell me that you have to have them for the right service. That you have to have the right intention. Zrika Minalan, we're going to skip Holacha, which is bringing the blood to the Mizbeach. Why are we skipping it? Because of the 4, we're going to see in a moment, we're going to see later on, you don't need to do it. Why? You could slaughter, Rashi comments, if I slaughter my sacrifice right next to the Mizbeach, it's right there. I don't need to bring it. It's not necessary. The last of the 4, the last of the 3 out of the 4 that are necessary is Zrika. So we'll go right to that one. Where do I know that one has to be done for the sake of the Korban? Well, why do I need a pasuk? Maybe the fact that I already know that's the rule by slaughtering and catching the blood. Those 2 are more strict because those 2 have to be done on the north side of the altar when it comes to some of the korbanos. When it comes to kachim kachim, the highest level korbanos, there's a certain location the slaughtering must be done. Certain location where you have to catch the blood. There's no certain location side where you have to sprinkle the blood, right? The sprinkle of the blood is onto the altar on the various parts. Also, sprinkling the blood is not even done when you bring a korban into the korban chatos, into the Beis Hamikdash. You sprinkle it inside the Beis Hamikdash. You don't sprinkle it on the Mizbeach at all. So therefore, Zrika is not done on the Mizbeach in all korbanos and all sacrifices. Whereas slaughtering and catching the blood is done in every korban. So therefore, it could be that those are more severe. Maybe those need to be done with right intent, and sprinkling the blood does not. Ella Amar Kros. So therefore, we'll bring a pasuk. Pasuk says, Hazorek es dam hashlamim. You sprinkle the blood of the shlamim. Sheteh zrika l'shem shlamim. The sprinkling of the blood has to be done for the sake of a shlamim. Okay, so v'lichtov rachmana bezrika v'leilef mina. Why don't I just tell me to sprinkle the blood by the shlamim, and then I would know for sure the other ones, which we just said were more strict, for sure those would need the right intent. Mishum deikal meifrach, because you can ask malazrika shekin chayav olazar misa, because all of the other ones might be that there's if a non-Kohen performs the service of the sprinkling of the blood, he gets the death penalty, like we said, right? But that's not the case by slaughtering. It's permissible. Catching the blood is prohibited, but it doesn't get a death penalty. So, okay, now, Ashkechan Kulahu, we've got all of them. Holacha minolan. What about carrying the blood? What about that one? V'chitema leilif mikulahu, you're going to learn it from the other ones. Malakulu shkein avoda, she'efshar levatla. The other ones are services you can't do without. Tomar b'holacha, you're going to say that by holacha, she'efshar levatla, you don't need. So therefore, maybe you could skip holacha, maybe you don't need to do it with the right intent either. So Elamar Cross, the pasuk says, V'kriv es hakol hamizbecha, you bring it all close to the altar, the mizbeach. So therefore, Avamar Mar said, Zu holachas ivarim lakeves. This is talking about bringing all of the portions of the korban tamid. You slice up the animal, then you have to bring them all up to the sacrifice. Not talking about blood at all. V'tanya, we learned in a brisa though, V'krivo, this you bring it close is zu kabalas hadam. This is catching the. This is catching the blood. V'afik rachmana b'lashon halacha, but the word that the pasuk uses v'takrivu to bring it close is lamemer de halacha lo tafka mikal kabbalah, that catching the blood and bringing it close is all part of the same thing. So therefore, bring it close is what is that service, and therefore it has all the same rules. So conclusion, and we'll stop here. That korban shlamim, we now learn from a korban shlamim. All of the four parts of the service need to be done for the sake of the korban shlamim. Now we specifically are using korban shlamim so far, right? All we've learned is that needing the proper intent is true by a korban shlamim. We didn't learn it by any of the other korbanos, and also since it only had one pasuk, remember that we say it's a mitzvah, but it's not required. Okay, you had a question on that? Was that make sense? Korban shlamim is all of our source.
So we need to find new sources for other korbanos.
Yes.
Okay.
We've got to go to other korbanos. We also haven't proved that you can't switch the owners. We haven't proved, right? All we've proved is you need, for a korban shlamim, you need intent for all four services for a korban shlamim, lechatchila.